couple of weeks ago, Newcastle United released their brand spanking new website, and if you went on it, curious to find about the history of the club, in particular about when Newcastle United were formed, you'll come to this page and it says history coming soon. What that means is Newcastle United are currently rewriting the history page of their website. And why have they done that?
Two clubs joined together quite a long time ago. I can't remember which ones.
There was Newcastle West End and East End, and then they came together to form Newcastle United in 1892.
They formed in the late 1800s from two former things. Stanley United, I can't remember much more than that.
It was Newcastle West End Club from up Scotswood Way. That's where Newcastle was founded, and it moved down to here.
Well, when they initially released it a couple of weeks ago, they told in the first paragraph a foundation story that isn't true. They said that Newcastle East End and Newcastle West End put aside their differences and merged to form Newcastle United. I hate to break it to you, that didn't happen. So almost immediately I reached out and contacted the club via email and challenged them for misleading the fans and telling a story that wasn't true. Welcome back, it's Eddie here from Tyneside Life. I cover the history, the culture and the football of Newcastle and the general Tyneside area, Geordie land. It's fair to say I've developed a real passion in the pursuit of local history, but finding out the facts and the evidence and dispelling some local myths. Not one to feed on the scraps of other media outlets. I do my own investigative journalism. So if that appeals to you, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so every time I release a new video, you'll get a notification. So to clarify, Newcastle United have been telling the story since 1992. The story of Newcastle West End and Newcastle East End merging to form a new club, the birth of a brand new club, and from there called this brand new club Newcastle United, and then asserted that Newcastle United were formed in 1892. And that's something I believed in through all of my years supporting Newcastle United, even up until about a couple of years ago. In fact, 3 years ago, I did a couple of stadium tours, and that was reinforced by the tour guides telling us the story of Newcastle West End merging with Newcastle East End. They've got displays on the walls when you do the tour that reinforces that story. And I had no reason to doubt that. You'd believe in those who are in positions of authority, trust, knowledge, and I didn't think twice about it. It wasn't until I stumbled across the real story from Paul Joannou that I really latched onto this. So from last summer, I've been kind of campaigning on his behalf, although he hasn't asked us to do that, but I'm shouting quite loudly to get the real story out there. Now, I should stress here in the very beginning that this story is not about me. This is not about me finding some obscure interpretation of the historical facts and then trying to impose my opinion on you to get you to change your mind about the historical story. This is more to do with the facts and support and evidence. This is more to do with Paul Joannou. He's Newcastle United's official club historian. He's done all the, as a local historian, he's done all the research. He's read the books, the club documents, the minutes of meetings, the old newspaper clippings, and put them all together and wrote several books. So if you were stood next to Paul Joannou in the Strawberry and said, however, Paul, settle an argument here, what's the crack? When were Newcastle United formed? And I can say this because I do keep in touch with Paul Joannou from time to time, and I've spoken to him very recently, and he's likely to watch this video. He will tell you Newcastle United were formed in 1881 as Stanley FC. And you'll say, well, what's the crack with this Newcastle West End and East End merging in 1892? And he will tell you it didn't happen. Newcastle West End folded in early 1892. Newcastle East End from the Biker area moved into St James's Park, salvaged some of the players from West End, put them in the reserves, who joined Newcastle East End. 3 months later, Newcastle East End changed their name to Newcastle United. So 1892 was not a foundation year. It was not the birth or the beginning of a brand new club. It was the slight renaming of an already established one. You can disagree with that if you want. You can disagree with Paul Joannou, the club historian, but good luck with that. Of course, 1892 is a very important and significant year in the history of our club. It's when our club was named Newcastle United, but it's also an unfortunate and sad year, 1892, because that's when Newcastle West End financially folded and collapsed. Now, in the December, when East End changed their name to Newcastle United, you can imagine at the time there was a lot of bitter rivalry between the two sides. I can't imagine for a second the West End of Newcastle on the Monday after the name change were suddenly Newcastle United fans. It would have taken a couple of years for them to come round, and as a matter of fact, it took 3 years for the Football League authorities to officially recognise the name change to Newcastle United, 1895. So, just because I've challenged the club doesn't mean I don't support them or I'm not a real fan. I've been passionate about this club since I was a boy, invested me time, me passion, me support, me money for decades, and that's going to continue. I love Newcastle United. It's a bit like loving your partner. That doesn't mean you're not going to have disagreements from time to time. Now, when I saw this particular website story a couple of weeks ago, I was annoyed. Knowing now what we know about what actually happened in 1892, there wasn't the birth of a new club. That's when I reached out and challenged them, because sometimes you've got to say, head on, you're not having it. So from a couple of weeks ago when they launched their new website, and a few days after that, I sent Newcastle 3 very passionate emails relating to the true foundation story of Newcastle United from 1881 with screenshots of support and evidence. Then they took the history page down, which are clearly being rewritten. I then reached out to Paul Giwanu, who I keep in contact with from time to time, and he echoed and shared my concerns. And he told me he'd also reached out to the club and sent them a note, in his words, as to the inaccuracies of the story that they were putting out. And I echo and voice Paul Giwanu's concerns that it's my understanding Newcastle United are trying to find ways to portray the 11 years from 1881 to 1892. And I agree with him in that. Why are they trying to portray or find a way? Just tell the factual historical story. But it's really hard for them to do that, and we're going to find out what they actually put in their history page when it's released in the next few hours or days, because the club have been locked into this false narrative about the 1892 foundation. If you want to know more about why that happened, why it was missed in 1981, and why they celebrated the centenary in 1992, I've done a comprehensive video on this about a year ago, and I'm going to leave a link to that video. You must watch it. It tells you exactly why they've got themselves into a pickle. So we await now to find out how the club word the foundation story on their website. I have warned the club that if they use spin of the historical facts, creative language, or linguistic trickery, that's going to create the impression or inference of a different narrative foundation story that's in contradiction to the historical facts. I'm going to be all over it.